Welcome, everyone. Pleased to have you here with us today for our 82nd episode of This is CDR. This is CDR is a presentation of OpenAir. It's an online event series intended to explore the range of carbon removal solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed, and to contextualize them for policy proposals OpenAir seeks to advance at every level of government in the U.S., as well as in national and subnational jurisdictions globally. My name is Toby Bryce. I work on CDR policy and market development for OpenAir, based in Brooklyn, New York. If you haven't done so already, please say hello and introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're zooming in from, and if you want your affiliation, and make sure you direct that message to everyone and not just hosts and panelists so everyone can hear from you. Just some quick background on OpenAir. We're an all-volunteer organization dedicated to the responsible advancement of carbon removal. We're a global community. We work together on shared open source projects that we call missions in the areas of policy, innovation, communications, and market development. Here's a picture from our website to kind of illustrate the range of projects we work on. We have a few dozen active projects, lots of very interesting and varied ways to get involved. Our co-founder, Chris Neidl, is running the chat, and he's put some links in there about where you can fill out a form to join our group and some other background on OpenAir. So we'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. One mission in particular that's very active right now is a bill in the state of Massachusetts called the Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act. It's a state-level public procurement bill for CDR. It has a very powerful sponsor, the Senate Majority Leader in Massachusetts, and it's had a couple of hearings, and things are going pretty well. And we could use all the help we could get from any Massachusetts residents in the audience who might be able to contact their local representatives and ask them to support the bill. There'll be a link in the chat to a call tool. It's a very simple tool that you can click where you live and call your rep, but it would be great to have you help us advance that bill. Before we get started, just some quick background definitionally on what we mean when we say CDR. The definition here is from a great resource called the CDR Primer, which is a great place to start learning about carbon removal, purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in long-lived products. This is essentially the same definition that the IPCC uses. We think it's a good one to work with. Two really important points when we talk about carbon removal. Number one is to disambiguate it from quote unquote carbon capture or CCS. CCS, it's a range of technologies that depending on how they're used, either reduce emissions or can result in carbon removal if it's biogenic CO2. But it's one thing it's not is carbon removal, which is purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Number two, when we talk about carbon removal, it's critical to call out from the rooftops that carbon removal is in no way, shape, or form any sort of substitute for rapid decarbonization of a global economy and reducing greenhouse emissions as much as possible. That's going to be 90+% of our climate work. Carbon removal, the purpose of carbon removal initially will be to neutralize the remaining order of 5 to 10% of global emissions that we can't abate, that we can't reduce, neutralize them by removing the CO2 from the atmosphere. And then in the second half of the century, there are going to be 2 trillion tons approximately of anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere that we're going to have to start drawing down to restore our climate to a safer state. And the volume of carbon removal that we're going to need by mid-century is billions of tons per year. We're currently at tens of thousands of tons per year. So we have a lot of work to do to scale carbon removal, and we need to start doing that today. So that's what we're here to talk about. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megha Raghavan, who's going to talk a little bit about run of show and introduce today's presenter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megha. I'm an OpenAir member in London, where I work on market development and policy. Quick housekeeping notes before we begin. So we're going to start with a quick presentation from Philip, followed by a few prepared questions and then moderated audience Q&A. So as we go along, just please type any questions in the Q&A box and make sure you find the one that is for Q&A, because it's just helpful to not have it mixed in with all the chat in the chat box. So yeah, go ahead and find the right one if you do have questions. We're recording the event, so we'll send it out to everyone who registered, and we will post it to OpenAir's website and OpenAir's YouTube channel. The link should be in the chat, so just have a look if you'd like to see those or any of the past episodes. Okay, this week we're very happy to welcome South Pole Global Director of Tech Removals and NextGen Chairman Philip Moss to discuss South Pole's work in CDR and the NextGen CDR Facility, which is a joint venture of South Pole and Mitsubishi. Philip is the Global Director of Carbon Removal Markets at South Pole and the Chairman of the NextGen Facility. At NextGen, he is overseeing the build-out of the world's largest diversified portfolio of certified carbon removals, which plans to purchase 1 million tons of CDR by 2025. He's a leading authority on establishing new sustainability-linked markets with a particular focus on the use of innovative financing to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And While at the World Economic Forum, he pioneered the concept of blended finance. Prior to joining the World Economic Forum, he gained extensive experience in both the carbon and clean tech markets as a managing partner for Mana Ventures, an Abu Dhabi-based clean tech investment advisory firm, and as the carbon portfolio manager for Masdar, where he managed the largest carbon portfolio in the MENA region. Philip founded the Blended Finance Group and has also held senior positions with 17 Asset Management, the Zayed Future Energy Prize, and the UNEP Finance Initiative. He received an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth and BSc degrees in both economics and statistics from North Carolina State University. So Philip, whenever you're ready, please come on and we can get started.
Thanks so much for that. Yeah, pleasure to be here. So I think perhaps I'll just start just giving you a bit of a rundown on the NextGen CDR Facility, our flagship vehicle at South Pole. As some of you may know, South Pole is a leading carbon project developer. Back in 2021, South Pole and Mitsubishi got together and said, look, we need to really figure out how we're going to address this concept of removals. There's a need for reduction and avoidance, but certainly we also need to support the removal industry. And the reality of it wasn't very much at the time. It's been amazing to see how quickly the sector has grown since then. And subsequently, we came together to launch NextGen last year in an effort to really help scale the carbon removal market and provide support to companies that are active in the space. So let me just share my screen. Hope you all can see that. So just to give you a bit of an overview of NextGen, as I mentioned before, NextGen is a joint venture between South Pole and Mitsubishi, combining our extensive expertise and insights. We're really dedicated to scaling the market for durable and certified carbon removals, which I'll touch on a little bit later. What we do is we draw on the extensive expertise, the networks, as well as the financial backing of our strong partners. To date, we have 5 foundation partners, the 5 organizations that joined together to launch NextGen last year. Those are Boston Consulting Group, LGT out of Liechtenstein, MOL, Mitsui OSK Lines, which is one of the largest shipping companies in the world, Swiss Re, and UBS. I think what's interesting to note here about our partners and NextGen is that NextGen currently is the 4th largest buyer of CDRs in the market. Combined purchasing between NextGen and our founding buyers is over 325,000 tons, which would obviously push us up above Amazon after the recent announcement today. We also work with a number of different strategic partners in order to help accelerate and move the ecosystem forward. So we have a strategic partnership with the X Prize, who we're working with to help guide the emerging companies that are coming down the pipeline through to a route to commerciality. We also have a number of other relationships with different organizations, many of whom I'm sure you are familiar with. I will point out a couple of them. So we are an implementation partner of the First Movers Coalition, which is the State Department's initiative to help decarbonize by 2030, led by John Kerry's office. And we also have been heavily involved as South Pole in the development of the CCS Plus initiative, which is really focused around developing a set of robust methodologies that can be used by CDR companies to ensure that we have data-driven, vetted, verified, validated methodologies to allow companies to accelerate and sell to the market with confidence. You're all probably very familiar with what are some of the constraints in the space, so I won't spend too much time on this slide, but effectively what we are trying to do with NextGen is to address some of these barriers. So obviously, as you know, there is a lot of confusion in the market around the difference between avoidance and reduction and removals. Add in the constant discussion around carbon capture and storage as part of the removal space, and it's clear that we need to do more in order to provide some clarity as to what we're trying to accomplish through carbon removals, as opposed to all these other actions which are obviously needed and very valid. We're trying to address the supply constraints as well. As you know, the market right now is fairly illiquid in terms of the availability of CDRs, at least in the short term. And we want to ensure that those removals that are coming to market have a high level of quality assurance attached to them. One of the issues that we hear a lot from our buyers is the fact of cost, that the cost is quite high and to a degree off-putting. We are obviously trying to put together a package for our buyers that allows them to get access to CDR projects and the insights that come with those offtake agreements at a range of different price points that meets their internal needs as well as their internal procurement processes. And then finally, on the quality assurance side, we have a heavy emphasis on the need for certification under a harmonized standard in order to ensure that we create a number of things, which I'll touch on in a moment. But in essence, what we want to ensure is that we're lowering the barriers to entry for buyers by providing them with greater clarity around both the methodologies that are being used, the assessment of those projects, as well as the MRV that's being applied. So, basically, we're trying to buy 1 million tons by 2025. And reasons for that is we want to use that signal to help establish market frameworks that will lead the market forward. We want to ensure that we are providing support to help innovative technology companies to scale. We want to ensure that as these projects are coming to market, that we have a degree of universal credibility attached to them, and that buyers can have confidence around those CDRs. And we also want to ensure that we are doing this in a way that's engaging globally. One of the reasons we obviously have Mitsubishi involved in NextGen is to ensure that we aren't just focusing on the West, but we also have involvement from Asia, and we have a mandate as well to look at opportunities in the global South. In a nutshell, what do we do with NextGen? We provide access to a diversified portfolio across geographies, technologies, and project concentration at a price point that allows some of these companies that wouldn't necessarily have come into the space to make a commitment. So we offer basically a blended price of $200 a ton, buying from a range of different price points to allow for a diversified portfolio, which helps buyers to mitigate their risk, but also allows them to price visibility for their CFO's office. On the credibility side, we ensure that every project that we contract from must be certified under an ICROA standard. We do a quality assessment of the methodologies under these ICROA standards before we will contract from them. But we want to ensure that there is a degree of fungibility that's available in the event that if one of these projects fails to deliver, or if there's a policy movement that changes, there's an opportunity to provide CDRs from another project to the buyers who are expecting to receive something. And then finally, we want to ensure that what we're doing is supplemental and complementary to other efforts in the space. And so we are very much focused on scale, projects that can deliver a significant amount of scale in the short term, which is why we are focusing on projects that will become operational by 2025, and that will be making a significant impact from a removal standpoint by the end of the decade. We are taking an ecosystem approach to how we address the market. This isn't simply about transactions for us. We're very much focused on the ecosystem writ large. And so what we are trying to do is offer something to all constituents in the space, as well as to ensure that the space moves forward. So from a buy side, what we're providing buyers is access to accessible pricing. We've had conversations with many who have said, we can't really do $500 a ton, but $200 a ton, we can get there. We also offer that portfolio risk mitigation and the quality and delivery assurance that comes from working with more mature projects at this stage. On the project side, we see a number of our projects have benefited from our purchases through market validation, either securing additional buyers, securing additional offtakes from existing NextGen buyers, or by validating their business model in their supply chain or to their financiers. Additionally, we also provide a single counterparty for companies. So instead of having to negotiate contracts with all 5 of our NextGen buyers, there's only one counterparty that projects have to deal with. And then on the market side, I think it's very interesting that we prioritize the certification process. We have been working directly with a number of the different ICROA endorsed standards to ensure that those methodologies are in a place that we feel comfortable from a quality assurance standpoint, that we can commit to them. One of the key things that our buyers project to us is that they want to ensure that there is no reputational risk, and that they have confidence that the methodologies have been structured in such a way that there isn't going to be questions raised exposed. So I won't touch on the rest. I know we're running out of time, but we are also involved from a thought leadership standpoint. So we're providing inputs and insights on the market and policy side of things, organizing thematic workshops, as well as providing different reports, both to external audiences as well as internal audiences. From an innovation standpoint, we understand that we may not be able to contract from some of the emerging technology companies. And so what we have done is we offer early stage showcases to our members. We are providing mentorship and visibility for some of these early stage companies. And we're engaged with different research networks to ensure that we are aware of what's coming down the pipeline as well, to provide that information to our buyers so they can be well educated and have more confidence in the market. And then from a policy side, we have been engaged with a number of regulators. We think that it's important to ensure that there is a regulatory signal to help develop demand in the CDR market. And so we positively received the word from the UK government, for example, that they will be including what they call GGR, effectively CDR, in the UK emissions trading scheme, which should be able to send a strong signal. And we're also engaged with a number of industry associations to provide our insights and input, such as the Carbon Business Council, which we've just announced, as well as working on different policy calls for input. In a nutshell, NextGen is effectively a portfolio management company for our buyers. We work to aggregate, diligence, originate at very, very minimal costs in order to ensure that we're lowering the barriers to entry for our buyers as much as possible. The goal here is not for profit maximization. The goal here is simply to ensure that we can encourage new buyers to enter the space and provide the demand signals so that we can take this industry from millions to billions of tons per year. We offtake from 5 different technology sectors. They're all land-based sectors. That is not a comment on any other types of technologies out there. It's simply a case of the fact that we've been working on this since 2021, and we have a greater degree of confidence and comfort, particularly from an MRV standpoint, around the land-based solutions. So you'll see we're involved with BICAS projects as well as high-temperature biochar, so very specific biochar with a very high persistence aromatic carbon component. We are off-taking for direct air capture projects, and we very much want to do transactions with enhanced rock weathering projects, but I'll touch on that a little bit later, and then on the product mineralization side. And then finally, we have 3 projects that are public at the moment that we can discuss. All projects are going through a certification process, so we have visibility with regards to the methodologies that will be used. We have an offtake agreement with 1.5, the Stratos project in Texas, which is a direct air capture and geological storage project. We are also an offtaker from Carbon, which is a high temperature biochar company based out of Finland. And then finally, we are a supporter of the Summit Carbon Solutions project in the Midwest in the US, which is building a large infrastructure pipeline to help transport biogenic waste emissions for geological storage. So I will pause there and happy to answer any questions you might have.
That was great, Philip. Thank you so much. Yeah, would love to start with a few prepared questions and just members of the audience, if you have questions for Philip, please type those into the Zoom Q&A box, and we will kind of split the time we have left between some prepared questions and audience questions. So we'll be happy to get to as many of those as we can. So that was really great, Philip, and thank you so much. Maybe just to start, just a couple questions about your initial round of purchases, which I think people found really interesting. Other large advanced market commitments have kind of stayed away from biochar because they're concerned about the carbon efficiency of the thermal conversion process, the fact that you're losing at least 50% of the carbon potentially as you do the pyrolysis or other thermal conversion. There are also some questions about durability, but I think a lot of people were excited to see you buy biochar and Carboculture. Carboculture's been on this CDR, great company, great team. Can you talk a little bit about that thought process and what got you over some of these questions about carbon efficiency and durability to be able to procure Carboculture?
Yeah, thanks, Toby. I think first of all, I would say it's very interesting to me the nature of the discussions around biochar that I hear in North America versus Europe. I think they are very different, and there's a different perspective on the role of biochar as a removal solution. Now, as we look at biochar, the science is obviously evolving, as it is with most of these projects in the CDR space. We've been looking at the scientific literature. We've been talking to different scientists. What we're seeing more recently is that the expected permanence rates for biochar, as I mentioned, for the persistent aromatic carbon component of biochar, is increasingly being extending. So I think you may have seen the recent Schmidt article talking about biochar at a very high temperature, about 550 degrees, and with different H to C and O to C ratios that provides that persistence. With Carboculture, I think what's really interesting is that their technical specs are well in advance of that. So we have much higher temperatures, we have much better H to C and O to C ratios than what is outlined in this particular study. And that provides us with a lot of confidence that this is going to reside in the soil, regardless of the soil type, which is, I think, an important point as we look at how biochar is stored. So from our perspective, and again, Toby, I'm not a technical person here. I have a great team of technical experts on hand, but based on the technical metrics, we think that Carboculture in particular is a great biochar company. From a holistic perspective, in terms of the portfolio, we think biochar is one of the solutions that should be included as we look to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And it's one of the solutions that can also be deployed in areas that may not necessarily lend itself as well to other types of technologies, such as in the global south. In areas where you have less access to a lot of capital investment. So we think it's an important contribution to the overall portfolio. Yep.
Agreed. And I put a couple links in the chat. We had Henrietta, who is Carboculture's incredible CEO, on This Is CDR several months ago. So that link's in the chat. And also they just inaugurated or put into operation their first commercial scale plant, 3,000 tons a year. And I think these purchases from NextGen and others are what enable companies to be able to do that. So it's really important. Slightly more controversial question. One of your big purchases was from 1.5, which is the joint venture between Oxy and Carbon Engineering. Oxy just bought Carbon Engineering. As a buyer, what are your thoughts on the role of oil and gas in CDR? And also, just to clarify, is enhanced oil recovery part of the purchase from Carbon Engineering, or not part of what they're doing?
Well, I can definitely say that South Pole and NextGen will not be buying CDRs from a project where enhanced oil recovery is being conducted. So I can't get into a lot of the details, unfortunately, but rest assured that we are, South Pole's had 17 years of track record trying to help promote the climate through various different activities, trying to mobilize climate finance. And this is, the NextGen portfolio is one of the ways that we are helping to contribute to that. We certainly want to ensure that we are not impeding decarbonization efforts. We see carbon removal as supplemental and complementary to decarbonization, and we think there's a tremendous need to support it in the short term in order to ensure that we get the scale that we need. So to come back to your question, Toby, as to how do we feel about 1.5 buying carbon engineering, I think one of the things to note is carbon engineering is one of the direct air capture solutions. It's not the only direct air capture solution. And if we look at direct air capture writ large, I mean, I think these are very capital intensive projects. One of the things that we think is going to restrict DAC at scale is access to financing. We are in a bit of a catch-22 situation here, whereby the companies that have the expertise, the infrastructure, and the financing to be able to develop these projects at scale, in some cases, come from the energy sector. So as far as the transaction goes, we have made it very clear, and I think we've actually seen that our transaction can be the basis for a discussion around transition. We've seen through our purchase that we are having more detailed conversations with the company, which are changing hearts and minds to some degree. We've made it very clear that we see the market for direct air capture as being one that is disconnected from EOR. And if you look at our rationale for bringing certification into the discussion, one of the reasons that we require that is to ensure that we do not have sort of adverse impacts from any projects that we're supporting. So I think there are a number of safeguards that we are able to put into place that will ensure that we are supporting productive activity to withdraw carbon from the atmosphere.
Good points. Thank you for answering that. I meant to ask you up front. You referenced the acronym ICROA, and I put a link to ICROA in the chat. But can you talk about just briefly what ICROA is and why it's important?
So ICROA is effectively an endorsement body around the carbon markets. They are a body that ensures that certification entities have certain parameters in terms of the way that they assess projects, in terms of the way that they issue credits to the market. A key component of ICROA is the fact that projects must be additional, for example, and that there is a public facing element in terms of consultations. So one of the reasons, in terms of ICROA, this is not an overarching, this is not the certification body. We work with a number of different standards that are ICROA endorsed, including ones that I'm sure you're familiar with, including Puro, Gold Standard, Vera. The reason that we decided to go with the ICROA approach was, one, we wanted to ensure that there were multiple routes for projects with emerging methodologies to get to market. But at the same time, we wanted to ensure there was a baseline that could be established there, as I mentioned, to ensure that we have some like-for-like ability to trade off between different projects in the event that some of these projects don't come through. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Regarding, you're committed to this portfolio approach to buying CDR. You have 2 bikers and 1 direct air capture project in the current portfolio. What other, in terms of diversification, what other approaches are you excited about that you feel like might be ready for the market and kind of in the immediate term?
Well, I mean, Toby, the fact is that the space is very exciting, right? We've got a lot of different technologies coming out through down the pipeline. I think, as we look at what we're trying to do and build a portfolio that buyers are comfortable with, that's diversified, where we can have visibility around the MRV and the quantification of the removals. As I said, we're focusing, our mandate right now is on land-based removal options, the 5 technology categories I outlined before. We may end up changing that over time, but at the moment, that's what we're focused on. I think they're all exciting in their own different ways. They each have their own unique challenges. I will say that we have spent a lot of time recently working on enhanced rock weathering. We see this as a very distributable removal approach, particularly in the global south. However, we still have some questions with regards to the robustness of the ability to quantify, monitor, and verify those projects. And so we're working right now with a number of the standards bodies to ensure that we get to that level of rigor that allows us to say, hey, as a buyer, we are now comfortable to put our name behind this. I will say, it's a very exciting space. I think what I've been taken by as we've been looking at these different projects is the wide variety of different approaches that companies are taking to the enhanced rock weathering discussion.
No, I totally agree. And Chris put a really cool project that OpenAir is working on in the chat called Carbon Gardener, which is sort of a distributed citizen scientist initiative relating to enhanced weathering. And yeah, very exciting space. And the verification is a big challenge, but the good news is there are a lot of really smart people kind of, I think, aligned and working together to maybe advance that to a point where big buyers can be comfortable buying the pathway. So that's very cool. I think that the conventional wisdom for a long time, and you referenced this in your presentation, was that the CDR sector is supply constrained. And that's true if we look at 2023 and 2024 vintage credits. Like if you want to buy credits that are delivered in 2023, you're going to have a very hard time finding high quality CDR at this point. But I think people aren't really aware of the scale of the volume that's coming to market in the 2025, 2026 timeframe. Can you talk a little bit about that and how, the bottleneck really is kind of switching from supply to demand, how you see that dynamic?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, Toby. I mean, if you just look at the two of the projects that we have in our portfolio today, between the two of them, you're talking 4 million tons per year coming online. We see, a pipeline. I think it's last time I looked at the pipeline, it was around a pipeline of 60 million tons by the end of the decade. That's supposed to be coming online. And then if you contrast that with where the buying market is, where buyers are today, there are 16 buyers in the market, which is fantastic, that have bought more than 10,000 tons. But 2/3 of the market is Microsoft. So I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we need to bring additional buyers in. Otherwise, we're going to be in a situation where we're all just trying to sell to Microsoft and trying to get up there, be part of their offtakes. We are trying our best at the moment to engage with buyers and make the case for why they need to be committing part of their funding towards carbon removals. But it's an uphill challenge, particularly in this economic climate. So, yeah, I think come 2025, we're going to see things get a little lumpy. I think you will probably see a bit of an oscillation between oversupply and over demand. The major bottleneck that we hear from companies is they need the offtake to generate the revenue stream to get financed. If all of that demand is sucked out of the market from some of these larger projects, then many of these projects are going to be stagnated. And we may not see the supply coming online. This is one of the reasons why we're working with regulators right now, is we would like to have a compliance signal being sent that will help buyers to say, hey, this could be a bit of a risk that we need to consider.
Yeah. And what, it's a hard problem, but you've referenced some of them, but what is your view on what needs to happen to get more buyers into the market? I think there are a number of factors at play. We talk about trust, we talk about cost, and we need buyers across the board. Frontier buys 12 new projects a year. We need more buyers of first of a kind projects to get, demonstration for new CDR companies and methods. And then we need the larger volume on the offtake for the more mature projects. So I think there are different solutions to each part of that, but can you talk a little bit about how you see the sector being able to bring more buyers in and what needs to happen?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. I think you touched on many of the factors. First and foremost, it's going to be, frankly, price. Until we can squeeze that price down, we're going to dissuade a lot of buyers. I have constant conversations with buyers that say, yes, we're really interested in removals. But as soon as they start hearing the price, their faces go white and they run away. To exaggerate a little bit. So I think there's a price issue here. There's a rationale issue here. So we look at the beyond value chain mitigation and the climate contributions. Certainly, I think these are intended to help encourage the private sector to come in. I don't know that they necessarily are going to be as effective as other mechanisms. One of the things that we have been advocating for is to establish a set of dual targets so that we are having carbon removals as a complementary approach to decarbonization, simply because right now, companies are sitting there saying, well, we've invested a lot of time and effort in terms of SBTI, in terms of our SBTI targets. They're not necessarily providing us with an incentive to work on removals until we figure out the decarbonization issue. So let's focus on the decarbonization issue because that's what we are aligned to do right now, and then we'll worry about removals. Right. So I think that's a piece, and then I think there's obviously that policy signal. We're talking about millions and millions of tons that could potentially come online, that we need to come online by the end of the decade. Without having a compliance mechanism to trigger that, I'm not sure if we can do it purely through the voluntary carbon markets.
Yep, agreed. You referenced a couple acronyms there, SBTI, BVCM, science-based targets, and we have a link in there that maybe Chris can put in the chat regarding a recent consultation that closed regarding beyond value chain mitigation. Can you sort of briefly top line what these things are and why they're important?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
SBTI and BVCM. I mean, just for the audience to kind of explain what they are and from a voluntary market perspective, like what's the direction they're moving in and why are they important?
Sure. I mean, SBTI is really the framework that's been that the companies are signing up to establish their targets to achieve net zero, or at least to determine how they are going to be net zero contributors in the future. The beyond value chain mitigation is looking at actions outside of a company's value chain that are contributing to climate action. So how are we looking at mitigating our impacts that are not related to effectively decarbonization efforts? However, these are voluntary commitments that are made effectively on a philanthropic basis. And I think that's a major challenge for companies that we talk to who, despite their desire to be climate leaders and to be at the forefront of this industry, still have to run any sort of funding through their procurement processes.
Yeah. And just the current SBTI has decarbonization targets and nothing binding on the removal side until net zero is achieved, at which point they do need to neutralize whatever their residual emissions are. Is that correct? And it does seem like there's potential movement to change that. And as you point out, to establish this idea of having dual targets that we're moving forward to meet now on both fronts, decarbonization and neutralization of residual emissions.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, removals are intended to help to offset or to counter hard to abate emissions, right? Those emissions that we are having tremendous difficulty in terms of decarbonizing or mitigating. So, effectively, what the SBTI targets are designed to do is to incentivize companies to move forward on their decarbonization efforts. As far as including an incentive for removals, the SBTI targets do call for supportive removals, but they don't outline a framework under which those removals have to be delivered or executed. And subsequently, as a companies are looking at this and saying, where do I have an obligation? What are my targets? Let me try to meet those before I worry about other extraneous activities. I think it's useful. We are seeing some signs that there is receptiveness to increasing the visibility and the incentives around removals. I think it will be a very, very slow process. As NextGen, what we are intending to do is to try and create other levers that will help buyers to say, although I'm very committed to SBTI, there's other reasons that I want to get involved in the removal space today.
Yep. And you mentioned a couple times compliance markets. Can you briefly just sort of top line what that means from a carbon removal perspective, and maybe what is your realistic, optimistic view of the integration of removals into a major compliance market like ETS, your emissions trading system?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when we talk about compliance markets, there's a lot of ambiguity there. There's when I'm referring to the compliance markets, I'm talking more about compliance or signals from regulators that action needs to be taken. So you've already seen in Europe in particular, moves for contracts for difference, for example, in the biker space, to incentivize companies to move away from more heavily emitting energy sources. But ideally, I think what we would like to see is some way to include removal offtakes into different emissions trading schemes, either through a dual target or through some sort of fungible mechanism that will provide an incentive for companies to say, let's allocate part of our funding towards removals, because we will need, gigatons by the end of the decade in order to reach our targets by 2050. You had in the past the clean development mechanism in the carbon markets, which acted as a tool for incentivizing technology transfer and investment, climate finance into the global south. Something maybe not the same as that, but in addition to existing decarbonization efforts, would be very useful. I think what we see as a major driver would be the inclusion in regional emissions trading schemes like the UK, like the EU, like Quebec, for example.
Yep. And just a shout out to another policy OpenAir is working on that maybe Chris can put in the chat. There's a bill in California called SB 308, which is a state level compliance market to integrate negative emissions into California's existing compliance regime. Really important. The bill has actually passed I believe the Senate, and we're working to get it passed in the Assembly, and then it needs to be signed by the governor. So still quite a bit of work to do, but that would, start incorporating negative emissions into the California compliance markets, I believe in either 2028 or 2029. So, there's definitely a lot of things happening there, but it's going to be like 5+ years away realistically, right? In terms of any sort of ETS integration, for example? Or do you think it could happen sooner?
I think it's really dependent on the region. I think the UK has identified carbon removal as a differentiating factor, and they will be announcing what the requirements as it relates to carbon removals look like next year. EU, from what I understand, is probably going to take a little longer. I believe they're going to look at this again in 2026. So you're probably talking about post 2030. So it really depends. I'm very supportive of regional schemes that want to be at the forefront of this industry, because I think it will send clear signals to other regions.
Yeah, absolutely. We are very much aligned on that. One more question, and then we're going to switch to audience questions. But beyond compliance, what are kind of some of the key policy priorities that you as a buyer would like to see advanced relating to CDR?
That's a great question. I think what buyers like the least is uncertainty. So anything that we can do to provide certainty around what is eligible, how removals will be accounted for in different schemes, what are the obligations on companies. We see right now with the discussion around corresponding adjustments that it's quite a complex area, and we have countries that are now turning around and saying, okay, we're going to put a carbon tax on your projects. That level of uncertainty is the same as any sort of investment. It's really just going to have buyers sit on the sideline until they get clarity. So it's really around the clarity. From a standards and certification standpoint, we think having guidance would be good. I think we are probably more inclined to see if we can reconfigure or adapt for purpose existing standards rather than creating a series of fragmented standards, which is going to just create higher transaction costs for buyers trying to navigate which standard is which and which one they need to abide by.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And on the policy perspective too, a shout out to public procurement policies. I think practically speaking and realistically, these are going to start out relatively small, but they will add more buyers to the market. So we have this bill in Massachusetts. The DOE in the US is going to be, I believe it's a $35 million pilot procurement program that they're going to be engaging, I think, in the next calendar year. So there are some movements there on the public procurement as well that are kind of I think, a bridge to getting to this world where we have a functioning compliance market for negative emissions. Philip, thank you so much. I appreciate you answering those questions. We have a great number of good audience questions, and please keep those coming. And I think Mega's going to come on and ask a few of those. There she is.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, we have a few questions, which I will get started with. So yeah, just in terms of the portfolio itself, is that something that South Pole kind of determines on its own, or do buyers have a little bit of input at all into what kind of, projects or technologies or anything that might meet their needs or that they're interested in supporting?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the way to think about NextGen is less of a portfolio manager sitting there saying this is what you're going to buy, and more of a cooperative type of approach. So we work very closely with the buyers to bring together a range of projects that meet their needs. So the way that it works is effectively we're leveraging off of a free originations from South Pole and Mitsubishi. So any CDR project that South Pole Mitsubishi sees, NextGen has a first right of refusal on, just to ensure that our buyers have access to the best projects. We run this through a process where we're obviously trying to construct a portfolio that can deliver according to certain vintages, according to certain technology segments, etc. So we are making recommendations as NextGen, not as South Pole, to the buyers. And then the buyers actually have a veto. So if they don't want a project in the portfolio, it will not be going into the portfolio. What we do that to ensure that we are not bringing in projects where companies are concerned. And just to provide a little bit of insight there, our buyers collectively talk and meet about the projects, and these projects are not activities that are happening on the side, but in some cases, decisions on these projects have gone all the way up to the C-suite to ensure that the company as a whole is supportive of these projects. So, it provides a lot of comfort to other buyers in the market that senior management at some of these companies is looking at these projects and saying, "Look, we agree."
Okay, yeah, and is that something you're seeing a lot of engagement from the buyers on really getting into the weeds of what kind of projects there are, or is it like a couple here and there, but most are just leaving it out of their hands?
No, I think they see NextGen as a mechanism for them to learn about the market, to understand what they're doing. We've seen several of our projects being approached by our buyers after we've presented this as a project. So it's actually leading to additional offtakes. I would say for the most part, as I mentioned before, we've contracted over 193,000 through NextGen. There's well over 100,000 tons that our member institutions have contracted in and above that. So they are very engaged. They may not have, massive teams that are dedicated to looking at this.
Sure.
NextGen provides them with a quicker way, effectively, to diligence and get insight into the sector.
Okay, great. We got a few questions on biochar. So one was just, you were talking about soil applications of biochar. Are there any other storage solutions like construction or anything else that you would look at, and why or why not, I guess?
Yeah, well, there are. I've had a conversation with biochar companies before saying, this would be a lot easier if you just stuck it in cement. I mean, I could get a lot of support for it. However, I think what that ignores is the fact that in many cases, the biochar needs to be sold as well in order to justify the costs associated with biochar. So there is a perception that it's very, very cheap, and it's actually not. I would say we see biochar that's actually priced above DAC. The revenue model requires the sale. In addition, there's a tremendous amount of co-benefits that come from the biochar in terms of soil sequestration, as well as impacts for farmers. So the answer is yes, but we've yet to see a case that would justify that.
Okay, got it. And is that higher cost kind of associated with higher temperature, higher durability biochar specifically, or is that just something across the board?
So we're focused on high temperature biochar in part because that's the expectations from some of our buyers that are involved in a number of global initiatives that have set 1,000-year permanence benchmarks.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we want to ensure a high degree of permanence here, and so it requires significant temperatures in order to achieve that.
Right. Okay. And just on that permanence, so this person mentioned that the European Parliament's Agri Committee has kind of agreed that biochar is a permanent solution. Obviously, NextGen is taking that position with biochar that's done in the right way. What do you think it's going to take to kind of convince the broader scientific community and CDR community that that's something that we should all kind of fall behind?
That's I wish I had the answer to the question. Look, I mean, I think from a buyer's standpoint, I think it's a little disheartening that we see so much competition effectively between different technologies, trying to say, well, our technology is the best. I think this is where part of the lack of confidence around biochar has come from in North America with a push towards supporting specific types of technologies. We think that it's really a case of allowing the science to evolve, having more scientific members of the scientific community reinforce these positions. It would help if we had a policy position that supported it as well. It's changing hearts and minds is a challenging task.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, and across the board in CDR, not just biochar. Okay, just turning to a different pathway. Someone wanted to know about enhanced rock weathering and kind of this idea that, even though we might believe scientifically that it works and it happens over a longer period of time, it's a bit harder to measure, exactly when and where and how the CDR is happening. So how do you think about that in the context of like the MRV puzzle not quite being put together yet and how you value it in NextGen?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is the reason that you haven't seen a ERW transaction today, is we need to get greater comfort around that. I think there is tremendous support for this particular type of a project. It's going to provide us with a lot more comfort once we were secure with the methodologies to ensure that there isn't a high degree of variability there. That the metrics are agreed upon and the safeguards to ensure that if there is any sort of issue can be corrected are in place. So from our perspective, we're hoping to do a deal by the end of the year. We're hoping to see some revisions and strengthening of certain aspects around methodologies to ensure that we can do deals this year. But as I said, I think each project or each technology is using a very different approach, and trying to find that consensus that the scientific community and the broader community can agree on as providing us with confidence is really where the challenge lies right now.
Got it. Okay. Just turning to the policy side of things, someone wanted to know if you've kind of looked into, you mentioned the EU ETS, and so have you looked into like the roadmaps for that and when and how you expect CDR to be included?
Yes, I mean we're in discussions. I think in the EU it's a slightly different pathway to the United States. I mean I think it's tremendous what the federal government has done in the US to help provide the financial incentives to move the market forward. I think it is more tailored around an innovation approach. So let's figure out the mechanisms to help innovate in the US. In the EU, I think it tends to be a little more focused around the taxonomy, the quantification, the methodology, and then they'll figure out the market elements to it. So as I said, every indication I have today is that it's still going to take some time before that can be pinned down. If I look at this in the context of the EU ETS, as I mentioned before, I think we're probably looking towards the end of the decade, if not slightly later. So for the moment, as an entity that's looking at where do we position pre-2030 or up to 2030, we're obviously focused on those policy movements that have been advocated for and put into place, such as in the US and other areas. France has just come out with one recently as well. So.
Okay, yeah. And then just more generally, are you seeing that the kind of, the way that you're setting things up, the sort of standards you're setting, anything like that, is that starting to seep into public policy or influence it? Or are you kind of actively engaged with policymakers as kind of, someone being a first mover on this?
Yeah, so what I'll say is, as NextGen, no, we're not trying to tilt the playing field here. We want to ensure that any discussions or dialogues are happening on a neutral basis, and that are the best interest of the climate. What I will say, though, is obviously we have been involved as South Pole in the CCS Plus initiative for several years now, really trying to ensure that we have data-driven, robust methodological frameworks that can be adopted by different standards. There is dialogue with the different policymakers about how do they set the parameters for CDR projects. So indirectly, I would say we like to think that we're contributing to that discussion, but we're not actively trying to influence it because of any conflicts of interest that might exist there.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's anyone who's kind of moving on this topic is already creating precedents and sort of ideas. So I think it's always just interesting to see how they all influence one another. Okay, great. I think we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been really great. And Toby, I think whenever you're ready to talk about next week.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Mega. And thank you to the audience for joining and for such great questions. Philip, it was great to see you. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I learned a lot, and I know the audience appreciated it as well. So thank you. Be well and see you soon. Just some quick show notes for next week. We're actually off next week for New York Climate Week. Lots going on in New York, and if you're in New York, would love to see you. And then the following week on the 26th, we have a very interesting program with Eva Tama, and she is an expert on supranational government. So we're going to talk about the Paris Agreement, Article 6, and how carbon removal is related to these things. And it's really important things happening in advance of the COP coming up in November. So it'll be good timing for that. There will be a big open period for comment on the Article 6.4 deliberations, kind of opening right when we have this webinar. So good timing, and look forward to seeing you there. We'll put a link in the chat to register for that. And we will also be announcing the sort of fall This is CDR slate shortly, probably in the next week or two. So lots of great programs coming up. So thank you again for being with us. Everyone be well, and see you in 2 weeks.